So I'm Richard Pugmire, I'm a technical architect from Leeds Teaching Hospitals. I'm going to give you a bit of the background of the challenge that we've been facing. Can you hear me at the back there? It's quite quiet. And Michael's going to go into some of the detail of the solution that we've put together. So, oh God. A little bit about Leeds. About 5 years ago we had a kind of a decision point in our strategy. Might recognise on the far left there, lots of disparate systems. That's where we found ourselves. Little pockets of excellence. And on the far right is your kind of Lorenzo one-size-fits-all solution, rip and replace, that we were expecting the national programme to possibly deliver. And we got to a point that we realised that wasn't necessarily going to happen and decided on a strategy that melded the best of both of those together. So we have a best-of-breed strategy. And it's underpinned by an open source EPR and a kind of an integration bus that glues it all together. So kicking in. So we had a clinical a 5-year strategy that we put together based on the clinical 5. One of the key features of implementing this was putting in place the EPR that binds it all together. And so we looked at breaking down the clinical 5 and ended up with some architectural modules. So decided that we'd need an MPI, some workflow, some integration, reporting. But the most important one was digital capture of information. So how do you meet NHS England's drive for paperless? It's very difficult. Paper is good. There's a lot of paper in the system. In a place like Leeds, we've got thousands of different forms. And it's very easy to pick up a bit of paper and a pen and just scribble away, where, you know, IT can sometimes be a bit of a barrier unless it's done properly. And you need to be able to capture the data in a much more structured way these days. You know, writing stuff down on a bit of paper, well, it's not very useful. You can't do any reporting on it, you can't structure it, you can't validate it. So there's obviously a need to put some electronic solutions in place. And scanning as well, it's not good enough. So forward and live scanning, putting together the information from the record, it doesn't give you that structure that you need underneath. So within our climate, had a few extra bits and pieces just to make it a bit more difficult. We have a program to replace our EPR. So we wanted a solution that could fit in with that program, fit in with the technologies that are in use. And we wanted a flexible approach to capturing data. So we didn't want to be bound to one technology or one platform. It's going to be web-based and, you know, work on multiple devices. And it's open source as well. So, you know, we're investing time, money, effort into something that is absolutely reusable across the rest of the NHS. And we want it to be reused across the rest of the NHS. And we already have our agile development process alongside the EPR, so we needed to fit into that process when we were doing our development of the Forms engine. And the platform that it had to fit on is a huge platform. It's a regional system. We've got 10,000 users in Leeds alone, another 1,000 across the communities and healthcare sectors, and then a few hundred that kind of extensive users across a cancer network that read and write information into the system on a regular basis. So the Forms platform has it's got big shoes to fill. So I'm going to skip to the good bit. This is the EPR. You might have seen this in other presentations, but at any point in the EPR, you can launch into the Forms engine, which is that standalone solution, but is actually part of the EPR. So you can't really see the edges. It's embedded in there, and you can start recording clinical information at any point from within the EPR. So this is I think it's an assessment form that's been launched from the whiteboard view, but you could also be launching a referral form or whatever from anywhere else in the system. So I'm going to hand over to Mike now, and he's going to talk about how we actually technically put this together and the approach that XML Solutions brought.
Thanks, Richard. Can people hear me at the back? So Leeds came to us obviously with a large detailed set of requirements, but we've been involved in Forms before, so we kind of distilled that down to what we think are these 3 overarching requirements. I mean, these were absolutely right at the outset, Leeds were very keen on this not being every time there's a new form, there's a development activity to bring that form out. So it's very much about this being a publication mechanism and a quick and easy way to deliver new forms into the live environment. But as Richard mentioned, paper is very prevalent for good reasons. You know, it is portable, it's not going to suffer a network outage, it's very easy to bend the rules and scribble in the margin and make it flex to whatever that particular environment's demanding at the time. So we needed to meet that challenge and make it you know, typically for the digital NHS, one of the key challenges is that the burden of capturing digital information falls on those frontline staff who typically don't have enough time anyway. All the benefits have been wax lyrical for 10 years or more now, and they're well understood, but it's still that, how do you get over that burden for those frontline staff? And finally, as Richard mentioned, this is a modular system. The form system sits alongside the EPR, but we needed a flexible framework so that we could persist data in the form solution, in the EPR solution, or indeed in another solution that may form part of the Leeds Care Record in the future. So the first bit is we needed a solution that allowed us to rapidly design new forms, and ideally with little or no technical intervention. So alongside the actual runtime forms product, there is a designer where clinicians can, you know, in fairness, we've yet to prove this in its fullness, but clinicians can drag and drop controls and design a form and, you know, at least give their first impressions of what that form should look like. And, you know, we needed a solution that fitted the whole gamut of forms that are out there, that capture some information that's purely sort of procedural, like a WHO checklist. Have you made sure that you've counted the number of scalpels at the beginning of the operation, at the end of the operation, or stuff like that? That's not really part of the clinical record, as well as things that are really core to the clinical record, such as a diagnosis or a procedure, and that kind of thing. So we need something which can deal with entirely unstructured information, as well as that other end of the scale with fully structured and coded information. And of course, you know, even the NHS now is getting used to using 21st century tools that are mobile, user-friendly and intuitive. So we absolutely, at a minimum, had to deliver a solution that has all of these features. So those are the cores, but one of the things that we really needed to do, as I mentioned, was make it as easy as possible for the people at the front line to complete these forms in a timely fashion. So only present them relevant questions. You know, one of the advantages the electronic world has over paper is that you can, based on previous questions, understand the context of what they're trying to capture, and therefore only, you know, skip to those questions that are important to that particular setting. And we're also plugged into the EPR, so why don't we pre-populate as much data as possible? And I'll talk a little bit more about that now. So what we came in terms of the design, one of the things that came out fairly early on was that you look at these paper forms, a lot of them are all capturing similar information, just in a slightly different way. So smoking history, alcohol history, height, weight, BMI, that kind of stuff. It appears on the majority of forms just as a background to that little nugget of information that is very useful to that specific form. So we said, well, why don't we have this building block approach where we always capture smoking data in a similar fashion, we always capture BMI in a similar fashion, and it reduces the amount of time when you have a new form requirement, you just say, well, I'll have a BMI, I'll have a smoking, and maybe I'll build a new section for whatever that particular use case is. So it harmonizes the data collection as well, so that all of those nuances across the trust you can try and harmonize, and where those things don't fit, well, then you can build a new building block that just suits that specific use case. But at least that 80%, which is common, you've got that core building block. And as a result of that, it maximizes the ability to pre-populate the form. So if someone's captured a BMI reading on one type of form 2 days ago, 3 days ago, and you're launching a completely different form which has that BMI section, well, we can pull that data through, so you're not recording it, you know, you're just sort of eyeballing it and say, yeah, that's fine, nothing's going to have changed in 2 days. So So for the technical among you, this is what it looks like in terms of the sort of logical blocks. So the bits in green is the core EPR, and the bits in blue are those additional modules that sit alongside there. So we have, as you can see, different persistence mechanisms at the back end. The Forms has got its own persistence mechanisms. It's got its templates that sit on a file system, and it's got a middle tier that manages that processing logic of where to persist data, what metadata to store, how to retrieve the latest set of information, etc. And going back to one of Leeds' core requirements, and that sort of leads on to how we manage this flexible persistence. So at one end of the scale, people may not even be plugged into the EPR. We need to be able to generate a PDF and store that on a file system for further onward delivery via fax or email or whatever the mechanism. The Forms engine itself has got its own store. The core EPR is a SQL database, and some of the forms, if you look at the demo site, will be plugged into that EPR. So rather than stored on the Forms data, they're stored within the EPR. And finally, looking to the future, looking at properly archetyped, clinically coded data that may be stored on another system in the Leeds region or elsewhere. So in summary, the Forms platform is fast and flexible in terms of delivering forms. It's extensible, and we've certainly got more ambitions of extending it further. It's user-friendly in terms of completing the forms, mobile-friendly, all of those good stuff. And it is both open standards-based. The forms themselves, the definitions of the forms are based on an open standard. It can integrate and deliver open standards, and of course, it's open source. It's highly modular, and the ambition is obviously for it to work in Leeds, but because it's modular, the idea is that it could either work standalone in a given situation elsewhere, or be integrated with another EPR, even another proprietary product if that's the way forward. So, where are we? So Leeds have been very open about this from the outset. So actually, the forms that are being developed at Leeds are all available on a website, on a dummy, sort of a test site, if you like. It's not plugged into any EPR or anything, but where you can play with the forms, understand what they contain, what they look like. And even the forms that are under development that are really not ready to go live yet are on this site. So if you go to the site, you'll see this sort of launch page. And as you can see, there's quite a few forms already. But if we launch into, say, a VT assessment, which is a relatively simple, this isn't a VT assessment, a relatively simple one-page form, you can see some of the stuff that I've been talking about, skip logic, so that if that's all it is, then you press submit, form's done. Here, you'll notice that the patient, on the purple banner at the top, is a CUI compliant banner with all the patient information pulled from the local environment. And in this case, the forms said, well, this patient's over 60, so I'll pre-check that box over 60 for you. It's also understood that this patient is female, and therefore it's asking her, or asking the clinician to ask questions around, could this lady be pregnant? But we talked about the building block approach. So if I launch if I can find it, launch a larger form, you'll be able to see that not only do we have a slightly different layout that allows the form to be, it says, have I clicked it? So this is a form that's really only had a first pass converting from paper to the electronic world. So don't worry too much about the form. But one of the things you can see about this form is that we've got, first of all the blocks of the form in an easy navigation section, so you can go through the form in a wizard-like fashion, or indeed you can skip to the section that's relevant to you at the time. And there's all this kind of skip logic that you expect in a form, so that as you answer questions, you get more information to type in, etc. But going back to the VTE form and the sort of concept of building blocks, you can see down the bottom, when we spoke to the preoperative team, they said, well, actually, we take every time we do a preoperative assessment, we also do a VTE. And we said, fine, we'll just put that in at the end. And exactly the same form that you saw previously is now presented in the context of a VTE. So this is absolutely around the sort of building block approach that we've been going through. So I encourage you to go and look at the site, have a look at all of the other sorts of forms out there and look at some of the controls and skip logic. But I won't go through every single form we've done, obviously, right now. So this is from the outset been designed to be an open source module, and it's been a collaboration between ourselves, XML Solutions, and Leeds Teaching Hospitals. But we're absolutely looking towards setting up a community of interest company. Richard will probably say a few words about that, and looking to get this module deployed in all those scenarios where it's required. Richard, would you like to say?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, we don't know what the model needs to look like. We don't know what the licensing and the open source community around this needs to look like. But we do know that it's something that is going to be of use to the rest of the NHS. And there have to be people out there that want to use what we've developed and are willing to work with us. So, get in touch, basically, and we can talk about how we can do this. Right. Thank you.